Iniam, do you hear anything?
I don't hear anything. I was just about to send a message to on the,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are starting this session now. Good afternoon, and very welcome to this session on solar irrigation to address recurring global food, nutrition, and fuel crisis in a climate emergency. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, my name is Santosh Nepal. I'll be moderating this session. Okay, good. My name is Santosh Nepal. I'll be moderating this session. I work with the International Water Management Institute as a researcher for water resources and climate change. So water, energy, food ecosystem have different challenges under climate change and other socioeconomic scenarios. In this graph, you see the food, fuel, fertilizer price index on the y-axis of the medium and least and medium income countries. Starting the early 21st century, we have now already seen three food, fertilizer, and fuel crises in just 15 years. We see the peaks in 2007-8 when there was a global recession. Then we see another peak in 2010 and 11. And more recently, the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic along with the associated supply chain disturbances also impacted the fuel, fuel, and fertilizers, and also including the war in Ukraine, which resulted in the cereal price index sharply rising in 2021 and 2022. So the key question here is, can solar system reduce the impact of the joint crisis for farmers? In this session, we discuss solar power irrigation schemes, their uptake and challenges in Africa and South Asia in a climate crisis. Solar irrigation, as you know, is the systems which convert the solar energy into electrical energy with water and food. There is abundant solar irradiations to support solar technology expansion, particularly in the global south, where there is already a challenge in terms of food security. The unique cost of various renewables have declined over the past 20 years. That's one of the very promising things. Because of this change, solar irrigation has emerged as a very viable alternative to diesel pumps in many areas of the global south. In context of climate change, it also acts as a cost-effective solutions compared to the diesel-based pumps and help reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. The switch from diesel to solar pump irrigation pumps can help reduce the adverse impact of fuel price spikes on farmers and also help building climate resilience through improved water security. Solar pump can also democratize energy access in regions that either remain off-grid, like sub-Saharan African, or where the reliability of electricity is very poor. So, for example, some South Asian countries. Also, solar-powered ground water irrigation can increase and stabilize the food productions, especially the dry seasons and also during the droughts because of the reliability on water availability for food productions. The CGIAR Nexus Gains initiative is working on unlocking the sustainable solar irrigations in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Among the other work packages, there is a dedicated work packages on the energizing food and water systems sustainably and inclusively, including the other work packages like co-developing the scaling solutions and boosting water productivity. In terms of solar irrigations, we have a very focused activities to generate a scalable, gender-sensitive, clean energy business financial models for solar-powered irrigation schemes, including the south-to-south learning on scaling solars between South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. So we have an excited session here. We'll have a two keynote speech reflecting the solar irrigation in Asia and Africa, And we have a first panel on the potential and constraints of solar irrigation use and expansion. We'll have a second panel on enabling condition, tools and policies for sustainability and equity. Without delay, I would like to now call upon our first keynote speaker, Dr. Aditi Mukherjee. Dr. Aditi Mukherjee is a director, Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Impact Area Platform of CGIAR. Earlier, she was a principal researcher at EMI, based in India, and before that, she was a water and air theme leader at Isimor, Nepal. Aditi was also a coordinating lead author of water chapter in AR6, IPCC AR6. And she's also a member of co-writing team of IPCC AR6 synthesis report, which will be published in March 2023. So over to you, Aditi.
Which one is? Thank you, Shantosh, and good morning, everyone. I am going to talk about one of the projects that I am co-leading. It's a bilateral project with the Swiss Development Corporation. This project is working in 4 countries, and here one of the most important things that we are looking is the potential. So we already know the solar irrigation is quite good for mitigation, but what does it also do for adaptation as well as for possible impacts on groundwater? So these are the 4 places we are working in. We are working in Punjab, Pakistan, Gujarat, Bangladesh, and province 1 and 2 in Nepal. We are looking at these 4 different aspects. How does solar irrigation relate to each of these aspects? First one is mitigation, then we are looking at adaptation and resilience building. We are looking at gender equity and social inclusion and groundwater sustainability. So when it comes to mitigation, solar irrigation pumps are an absolutely clear winner. It's a no-brainer. What we are doing is replacing dirty diesel pumps or even electric pumps. Electric pumps are also dirty because the grid electricity is fossil generated so far in our region, except for Nepal, where it's a clean energy. Nepal is an exception, but for India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, the grid electricity is almost so far even 70 to 75% coal powered or thermal powered. So these are some of the numbers coming from various papers. We are seeing 8 to 11% of the region's total carbon emissions. This is huge, and this is very different. Like only South Asia has this amount of pumping that leads to so much of emissions from CO2. We are seeing so much of 12 to 24 gigatons of black carbon, which has health implications, and so many million metric tons of CO2. So these are various papers, so that's fine. So what we are finding from our field evidence is that SIP farmers are using less diesel, and from example from Nepal shows that they're using almost 7 diesel farmer, only diesel farmer. The top one is using 770 hours of diesel pumps, but when the farmer gets on solar pumps, they're only using diesel for 275 hours, and we actually want to even cut that out. But right now the reason that the solar farmers are still using diesel pumps is because some of the diesel pumps sometimes break down, then they have winter days with fog. So what we are seeing is almost 70-80% reduction in that. In Bangladesh, we are seeing that solarizing 3 million hectares of diesel irrigated area can reduce 1.2 to 1.6 million metric tons of CO2 per year. So that's very clear that solar pumps have a huge mitigation potential. But we are also interested in things like adaptation and risk reduction. So we have some evidence of that also. We are finding that the solar pumps are a good hedge against rainfall variability. This is our example from Saptari district in Nepal, where we are finding that the use of solar pump is actually being done in the gaps between the 2 rainfall events. So these days what we are seeing is that there are also larger gaps even in the monsoon season. Earlier farmers wouldn't need any irrigation during the rainy season, but now you have larger gaps between 2 rainy seasons. So the use of solar pump is very well coordinated with the actual rainfall event. So basically farmers are using whenever that rainfall duration is low. We are also finding that lot of the farmers are, lot of the small and marginal farmers are using solar pumps in Bangladesh. Now coming to crop diversification, another strategy of adaptation. Crop diversification, as we all know and argue, is a good strategy of climate adaptation. We are finding that in Bangladesh, farmers receiving irrigation from SSIP tend to grow more summer paddy. That's a bit counterintuitive, because irrigation basically allows them to grow more water intensive crops, and they may have a little less diversification than others. But in Nepal, we are finding those who adopt SIPs are diversifying their farms, and they are growing more crops than diesel farmers. Then we also looked at impacts and costs and profits. We are finding enhanced income from agriculture coming from two sources, either because the yield of the crops is increasing. We are finding that evidence in Bangladesh, where crop yields are increasing, or due to actually reduction in cost of irrigation. So here we are finding, this is example I think from our Pakistan side, where we are finding that the farmers who have adopted solar irrigation are growing more high value crops like orchards, etc., compared to other farmers who haven't. We are also finding that farmers are saving on diesel costs, leading to lower cost of cultivation. Then another example from India, where we don't have solar pumps have replaced electric pumps. What we have is these grid connected solar pumps. So the farmers have the option to use groundwater or to sell back to the grid. And in this case, what we are finding is that farmers are earning money by selling electricity back to the grid, and that income can be up to 15% of their annual income. So that's also a very good example of a just energy transition, because remember, many of these farmers who are earning the highest income are actually in some of the driest zone. So they cannot anyway cultivate anything in the summer season because the groundwater levels runs dry and all of that. But they at least now have another alternative source of income that comes from clean energy. So this is quite a successful scheme in Indian state of Gujarat, and we are evaluating this, and all our papers are in final stages of being out, but we have very good. So my final part of the presentation is around, there is a lot of fear among everyone that solar pumps would lead to more water use. And the reason for this is pretty clear. Like diesel pumps have a very high marginal cost. Like every liter of diesel costs you money. So farmers are trying to literally economize on how much they irrigate. But solar pumps have zero cost. So this is an example. All the blue dots are, this is a meta review of over, I can't remember, 70, 80 studies. But all the blue dots are actually cost of irrigation, and the blue dots are for diesel pumps. So you can see that the diesel pumps actually run for much less than all those yellow and those dots. Those are different kinds of electric pumps with different kind of tariffs. So that's the fear, literally. The solar pumps, by reducing marginal cost of pumping, will increase groundwater irrigation. But the results that we are finding are not showing that yet. We are finding in Bangladesh there is no increase in total hours of irrigation. And part of the reason is that farmers are already growing very water intensive boro crop. So there isn't really any further scope of using more water. In India, this is the example that I was talking about. Again, no statistical difference. The sky, non-sky, the sky is the name of the solar scheme. And we are finding that even though it looks they are different, but they are not statistically significant. And the reason for that really is the scheme that I told you about, the incentivization. So farmers actually have an incentive to use less groundwater and sell it back to the grid. So we are not finding that our farmers are using more groundwater because they have solar irrigation. But again, I would say this is relatively early in the research, and we need to just get this nuance. So overall, for those places which have grid connection, and Africa will also eventually go towards grid connection, if not national grid, then certainly regional grids or smaller, micro grids, where we are proposing that we can incentivize less groundwater use with grid connection and feed-in tariff in this way. So basically, distributed solar generation is a good solution. So I'll just stop there, being conscious of time, and pass on to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Aditi, for highlighting the solar irrigation systems in South Asia. Our next keynote is Dr. David Mekonnen. Can you please switch to the Zoom? Yeah. Dr. David is a research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute based in Washington. His research interests include understanding the different aspects of water, energy, food nexus, the impact of irrigation on livelihoods and rural households, water economics, and impact evaluation of development projects. David holds a PhD in agriculture and applied economics from University of Georgia. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Santosh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just spend few minutes of the next 6 or 7 minutes to discuss a little bit about solar irrigation in Africa and what it takes to increase its adoption. But first of all, before going to discussing about the solar pumps, particularly for irrigation, the reason why we are interested in this issue, particularly for irrigation, in solar irrigation for solar pump for irrigation, is because irrigation is very essential for climate resilience, food security, and nutrition. In the last few years, we have seen a number of papers showing this is actually the one that we have done, showing that irrigation is important not just for increased income and higher yield, but it's also important for improving the nutritional status of women and children in Africa. We have seen, for instance, in Ethiopia, as well as in Tanzania, that access to irrigation has reduced child wasting. That is basically severe and acute shortage of food, and the resulting lower weight for height has reduced for children in irrigating households. We have also seen improvements in household dietary diversity and women's dietary diversity as a result of irrigation. This is a result that was coming from a project funded by the Innovation Lab for Small-Scale Irrigation. So given the importance of small-scale irrigation or irrigation in general for household food security and as well as nutrition security, and the role that we have already seen that solar pump can help us in terms of promoting irrigation, then the next question is, what are the potential for solar irrigation in sub-Saharan Africa? Obviously, there is a huge potential for solar pumping and solar irrigation in Africa. And this is particularly true because in most of sub-Saharan Africa, the grid connection is not that wide. And as a result, the high potential of solar irradiation coupled with lack of other alternative energy sources makes solar a very good potential to improve food security and nutrition security in sub-Saharan Africa. Having said that, we also have to take note that partly the reason why the previous, this was also kind of mentioned earlier, that the solar potential is not necessarily where there is a huge amount of water. So solar potential, for instance, is very high in North Africa, in Southwestern Africa, where water scarcity is also greatest. So while we are pushing for solar irrigation and solarization for agriculture, we also have to be cognizant of the need for institutions and proper mechanisms for groundwater governance. In much of sub-Saharan Africa, solar irrigation is going to be very cost-effective compared to diesel for about $2 per watt peak solar. So this watt peak measures, that is how we measure solar modules, and it is showing, or it measures the amount of solar energy, the amount of energy produced at complete radiation. So at about $2 US per watt peak, solar is more profitable than diesel across much of Africa. There are places where you have to have a higher, where the solar energy becomes cost effective than diesel at a higher level of production or at higher level of watt peak. But that is mostly in areas where diesel is highly subsidized. Other than that, in many places, it is cost effective compared to diesel. Obviously, this has to be done for different places, for different crops, but this picture is showing for tomatoes using the drip irrigation. When you come to country level analysis, obviously there is a need for in-depth assessment across solar, diesel, and other alternative energy sources, including electric grid. And we have tried to show this using Ethiopia as a case in point. This is a project from Oxford Policy Management. So basically this one is showing for selected 4 crops in Ethiopia, maize, wheat, tomatoes, and pulses, there is a potential to add about 1.1 million hectares of groundwater, but for 25% of that area, solar is cost effective, and for 43% of that groundwater irrigation, the grid is going to be cost effective compared to the 3 diesel, grid, and solar. But given that there is also a high subsidy in Ethiopia as well for diesel, diesel is still cost effective for about 32% of the area. The point I want to make on this slide is that one, as we go into development, we have to have in-depth assessment that includes different crops, that includes different energy mixes, and also that takes very high resolution data on biophysical constraints as well as prices and markets. This is some of the findings from a recent survey in Nigeria funded by the World Bank, and we have asked solar actors in the solar value chain on what are the challenges to increase solar pumps in Africa. And some of the messages that came from that survey include lack of information and awareness of farmers, higher cost of solar PVs compared to with other pumps, lack of financing, theft of these solar panels, high tariffs on equipment, counterfeit products, and sometimes lower performance of solar PVs. There are also other important constraints that needs to be addressed, including reduction of efficiency due to dust at some parts of the continent. But overall, if you focus on what it takes to move from potential to reality, there is a need for new financing models, such as asset-based financing. And there is a need for direct targeting and marketing to women farmers. There is a need to expand after-sales support. In many places, diesel subsidies are affecting the cost effectiveness, artificially making diesel cost effective in many places. So removal of diesel subsidies in many places can help the cost effectiveness and hence adoption of solar pumps. There is a need for capacity building on irrigated related extension, pest management, and the provision of appropriate inputs to make irrigation cost effective. As farmers are investing a lot on solar, we need to make sure that it is profitable venture. Developing
if you can conclude your slides in next 1 to 2 minutes.
Yes, this is my slide. So there is a need for more targeted solar advice as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dait. Well in time, and thank you for very much for highlighting how solar is more profitable and cost-effective in case of Africa. Now we are switching to the next session of our next panel discussions. First panel discussions. I'll just arrange a chair at the front. Okay, we are moving to the first panel discussion. I would like to call upon our panelist. Just give me a readout. Okay, our first panelist, Ms. Sabnam Shivakoti. Ms. Shivakoti is a joint secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, Government of Nepal. Prior to this, she was a provincial secretary. She has been engaged in preparing various policy and strategic documents and is a member of various boards and committees. She has a master's degree in agriculture from Asian Institute of Technology. Our second panelist is Abdul Karim Saeed. Dr. Saeed is a senior water resource specialist at IMI and country representative of Ethiopia and regional representative of East Africa. Dr. Saeed has over 35 years of experience in the field of irrigation planning management, integrating analysis, policy, and program management. Before his appointment to IMI, Dr. Saeed was Deputy Executive Director of the Nile Basin Initiative Secretariat. Our third panelist is Dennis Junger. Is Dennis here? Okay, no, I have been looking for him. He represents the GROOTS Kenya. GROOTS is a national movement of grassroots women-led community-based groups and self-help groups. So we'll see if he can turn up later, but now I think we can start our panel discussions. Okay, my first questions to Ms. Shivakoti. Ms. Shivakoti, that Nepal has adopted solar-powered irrigation schemes already and installed more than 1,500 solar-powered irrigation schemes. So how do you see Nepal's progress in solar-powered irrigation systems? Why there is slow expansion? What needs to be done?
Okay, thank you, Santoshji, and also the organizers for having me here. It was very interesting to listen to the two presenters, which put the scenario, the case scenario that the question that you have put to me. Before I go to the question, just to give a quick synopsis on how Nepal is critically, taking this issue seriously in terms of our overall trade. Nepal is facing overall trade deficit, and one of the major reason is, of course, the import of these fossil fuels, the diesel fuels. And almost 10% of these imported fuels are used for the agriculture. That is one concern. And another is also the agriculture trade deficit is growing, especially the import of rice. And to increase the production of rice also, we need to increase the irrigation, especially for the spring rice season. And that's why the different irrigation technology, the innovation technology is very much relevant when we talk about the nexus of food, energy, and the water. So in this scenario, Nepal has been definitely promoting this technology through its various programs, especially the subsidy schemes, that subsidy policy is there to promote these technologies. But despite the effort, because there is the two kind of subsidy delivery mechanism. One is through the Ministry of Energy, Water Resource and Irrigation, and also Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, and the province and local government. So the subsidy regime is different for different, through the different ministries, although they are all government entities, but the subsidy regime is different. Despite those efforts from all the sectors, the scale up is not up to the mark that we're expecting. So some of the regions also highlighted by the presenters when sharing about the Africa, I think I'll just briefly go up on that. One is, of course, the technology, because this is new technology, and farmers are so used to using the diesel pump, and that it is easier in terms of the cost also. Initial cost for the solar irrigation is higher. So diesel pumps, they are relatively different companies are there, so they are relatively cheaper. And then also because they can be, they are mobile. I mean, you can take those pumps to wherever you like and then bring it back home. So there is no issue of the theft, and also there is no issue of the, they can also rent out those pumps, for the other purposes. But when we talk about the solar irrigation, they are fixed, and therefore that is probably one constraint where the farmers are not able to expand it. And another is also because when we talk about the technology, there is the concern of the seasonality also, because when there is the winter, when there is foggy environment, or when it is raining very hard, then at that time also we cannot really use this solar energy. So that could be probably other constant area. And third is because farmers are not really aware about the benefit, because although the initial cost is higher, but as presented by Aditi also, that in the long run they are cheaper. But we have to communicate that message properly to the community, that why this is more cost feasible in the long run, and also how this helps in the mitigation purpose. So this is the awareness, this message we need to communicate at the local community, and also to the local government for that matter. So these are one of the area. And also if you look at the region wise, because we have in the plain area, they are more possible. And also they are expanding in the Tarai plain area of Nepal, but we have lots of hills where it is very difficult to install this kind of system, because even if you have the system for the farmers, they have scattered land, small lands, and then scattered land. So it's really difficult to utilize this kind of technology. So these are some of the reasons really associated with the technology. And there are other constraints such as after-sales services provided by the vendors, and the cost of operation and maintenance. So these are associated with the technology. That's one thing. And another is because in terms of the business models also, because as of now, the modality that the way the subsidy modality runs is that government announces of the farmers, they apply for those schemes, and then they are finally able to access those inputs. And so demand is there, but because of the limited government budgets, it is not accessible to all the farmers. So, but if there is no subsidy, you can think about if there is no subsidy for this, will this technology scale up? So that is another challenge. So where I think we might need to also think about the appropriate business models that some of our South Asian region are applying. So if this could be the alternative model, probably this model can also help expand the scope, because if we only rely on the government subsidy programs, then probably we might not be able to get the kind of expansion, the scale up that we really intend to when we talk about the issue. And then last but not the least, and also in terms of the financing part, because the credit financing mechanism for these solar irrigation, be it through the simplified the soft loans, or be through the other product modality also, this is also not really getting attention to the banks to have it as a more viable product. So these are some of the areas that I think are constraining. And also, as indicated in the Africa presentation also, this is with the land ownership also. Because of the land ownership also, many of the farmers, they are not able to access the schemes of the government, and especially the women farmers, because they hardly have the ownership of their land. Few women farmers have land ownership. So because of that also, many of the farmers, they are not able to access it. So as of now, I'll just stop here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Sivakoti. Thank you for highlighting that technical challenges as well as the climate-related challenges. But also, I think you are very important at highlighting the behavioral aspects and challenges at the community scale, and including the financing mechanism. Now, I would like to go to Dr. Saeed. Dr. Saeed, the same questions, like how do you see the solar irrigations in Africa? from your experience from Ethiopia and other the African countries that you have worked, why there is little expansions? What are the challenges, and what needs to be done?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Good. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you very much. And I will be speaking from the experience in Ethiopia primarily. And yeah, so talking about solar irrigation pumps or solar irrigation systems, especially in the Ethiopian context, yes, it is true the uptake and the scaling has been very slow. First of all, I think some of the challenges were mentioned by David, very comprehensive list, which I agree with that, and especially, for example, lack of information. So not only solar pumps, in general, use of pumps for irrigation in Ethiopia is really at a very, very infant stage. That's very important to know, because when someone is already using diesel pumps for irrigation, then solar is an alternative. When somebody is not using pumps at all, then entirely new thing. So this is one. So lack of information, what is really available, and whom even to approach, for example, if you want to implement or install solar pumps and so on. That is very important part. But more recently, the government is actually very aggressively going about small-scale irrigation. Really, small-scale irrigation is expanding in Ethiopia at a very fairly fast speed, actually, largely led by the farmers themselves, and usually using the rivers themselves. Actually, those who are in the floodplains close to the rivers, they are using the rivers for irrigation. When it comes to solar, IDUMI has done a study, for example, suitability of land or solar suitability of farmlands in Ethiopia for the entire country. That information is already available. But in many cases, you don't really talk only about solar irrigation without talking about water management. All right, because you need to know where groundwater is available, the depth to groundwater. That is very important, because you need to have the water supply, the water management part of it, fix it. Already, that very much determines the viability of it. All right, so you cannot simply talk about solar irrigation. On the other side, you also, people have talked about the initial cost, obviously. Initial cost is very high. And there's an issue of subsidy on, for example, diesel. That is also the case in Ethiopia. But on the other hand, for example, in Ethiopia, for solar pumps, there is actually tax exemption. There is tax exemption for solar pumps, for importing solar pumps, which is really good. For this reason, the initial cost issue is a big issue. The first is lack of information, lack of awareness. All right? When I say that, people in rural areas, they are very much aware now about solar energy in general, not necessarily pumps. Because they can easily buy from shops, very small panels to lighten their huts. It is very common if you used to go to the countryside in Ethiopia. And also for charging mobile phones, which is a very good trend. We need to build on that, because people are now aware of solar energy. And the question is now how to make that big leap now, going to also water lifting using solar energy. That is very important in point map. So the second is the lack of investment, which means lack of also credit lines, for example, from the banks. That has not been developed yet. And I think that is also linked with the size of the market. The size of the market is still very small. So if you are a banker, you also want, of course, you have to get something back. All right? So, and that has to do with, the size of the market for solar energy. So that means that's also another challenge that we must overcome. I think that's one of the reasons why. So people are working on different kind of business models. For example, pay as you go or pay as you own. That is still at experimental level. All right? So it has to do with the size of the market. It needs to expand. That's a big challenge still. One other thing which I would like to mention also is, assuming the water is available, assuming the solar is also energy or the pumps are available, but the requirements are very site-specific, all right, very context-specific. If you produce something with it, you should be able to have a good value for your crops. Otherwise, you cannot pay back. You cannot sustain it. That means solar, giving the solar energy alternative, it must be bundled with other services. Maintenance support is very important, and developing the market chain, the value chain for certain types of crops or cash crops, which the farmers can grow and get good value for it, and then pay for the solar energy itself, for the pumps and so on. And this one, again, is context specific. It's not the same crop everywhere. It also depends on the land holdings of the farmers again. So for this reason, when we talk about solar energy, I think the specific context of the farmers is very important. Again, the segment of the farming community we are addressing is also very important, because not all households have the same resource endowment. So for this reason, we need to do a lot more, really, until we pass that tipping point, in my view, beyond which the farmers don't need us, because they can still do it by themselves. Right now, we still have to do a lot of heavy lifting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Said. Really importantly highlighted the market aspects, tax exemption requirement, and also the I think the size of the market also matters for the scaling. Before concluding, I would like to again come back to you for just one final remarks from in 1 minute. So, Ms. Sivakuti, from your experience from Nepal, what are one or two aspects that need to do to overcome this slow expansion? So what are the two priorities, just in 1 minute?
Okay. I think the one is, of course, I would look at the assessment of the requirement, the assessment itself, like what is our potential, because also shown by the photovoltaic map of the world. So one is we need to have the detailed feasibility on what is the potential, what is the opportunities there, and based on that we have to be very strategic in implementing that policy in terms of making the communities aware about its, imparting the information, making it aware of the benefits that both the direct benefits and indirect benefits to the community. That is very important, I think. And second is also because after we have implemented this policy of the subsidy to enhance the solar irrigation, we have not really have a very clear monitoring and then evaluation of this process. So maybe we need to look upon how, what are the constraints, because here now I'm saying the constraints based on the experiences and the field and also the voice from the farmers, but what is actually happening in the field, why the adoption is slow. I think we need to understand that in a more broader perspective, so that the policy measures can be revised accordingly. I think there are two things I think we need to focus on.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sivakuti. You importantly highlighted the potential and feasibility, but as well as the requirement for monitoring and evaluations. Dr. Said, two aspects to overcome the slow expansions in Africa from your experience in 1 minute.
2 aspects.
Yeah.
Okay.
The two most important aspects.
Okay, I think what I'm thinking here is there are in Ethiopia, for example, areas which are using more and more diesel pumps for irrigation purposes. Probably they could offer a good, a fertile ground there, because the farmers are using already pumping for irrigation. All right, so giving the solar alternative could be somewhere where it can be picked up quickly, because unless the farmers own it, I think only external push doesn't work. That's how I look at it. So that's very important in my view. So try to use existing processes there to build on them and to leverage those in order to scale up. Second is, there is now a big project called DREAM project, which was announced by, financed through the World Bank by Ethiopian government to expand solar irrigation, solar energy in general, but also including irrigation. That could also be a very good, that can be also leveraged, in my view, to build more or to scale up more solar irrigation. Why I'm saying this is, usually isolated efforts don't make much result. Usually externally financed, you come with the project ends and the whole thing collapses. But if you are adding to an existing process, then you are building the momentum that we need now to really build the momentum to expand solar energy. solar irrigation pumps.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Said, highlighting the importance of existing process, but also as well as the collective efforts. So let's give a huge round of applause our panelists. I think it was very informative to hear from their experience. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now for second panel, I would like to request Dr. Aditi Mukherjee to come over here. Thank you.
Tell me the time, huh? We don't have. Right, okay. Yeah. Hi. The topic for the second panel is, first I'd like to invite the two panelists for this. I know that Binod Ayo from USAID is joining us virtually. Hello, Binod. Hello, Biniam, sorry. And do we have Joshua Wycliffe from the ISA here today? Possibly not. And then I also want to invite Mr. Arif Gohar, Head of Agriculture and Coordination from Climate Change. Yes. Mr. Arif, please come. So we have two panelists, one online and one joining us in person. So Biniam is a senior policy advisor at the USAID. And he's the agreement officer representative of the Policy Evidence Analytics Research and Learning called PEARL, and strengthen evidence-based policy mapping in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Caribbean projects that are implemented by IFPRI. So welcome, Dr. Biniam. And Mr. Arif Gohar is an agronomist and agroclimatologist, and he has contributed to various IPCC, UNFCCC, UNEP, FAO, WMO, and ECMOD reports in the past. So welcome to both of you. My question here is, in the previous panel, we heard that while there is a lot of potential for solar irrigation, there has not been as much uptake as we would have wanted it to. So the question now is, what do we need to do differently to accelerate uptake and grow sustainability of water use? In my presentation, I touched upon the groundwater issue and improve access by the poor and women farmers. Even whatever we are finding is the access or uptake, mostly those are by rich farmers and not necessarily poor farmers. So to you, Biniam, you have around 5 minutes to answer this question. What do we do differently? That's really the question. Yeah. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute thoughts on this very important topic. Irrigation, along with many other farming technologies, can significantly contribute to our climate-smart agriculture goals. In areas where the Feed the Future works, the need to capitalize undercapitalized resources such as irrigation is very evident. There are many areas of research that can accelerate sustainable uptake of irrigation. And as a development agency, we're working to ensure that USAID-supported research is not just for publication, but that it is demand-driven. For example, is it a collaborative process, and is it led by local universities? And is that it's co-led with development actors such as local extension services that can take the lessons or recommendation from the research process. I emphasize the word process here, as the stakeholders need to be involved from the very beginning through to the end of the research process. With that general framing here, I'm going to pose 5 research questions based on my experiences overseeing the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for small-scale irrigation and other USAID projects that I am going to elaborate about. The first question I would ask to accelerate uptake of solar irrigation and other technologies is, how do we identify where and in which scenarios are context-fit irrigation practices appropriate? One of the many factors we need to consider here is that, is there enough quantity at the appropriate quality, and also if the timing of water application is right. An example of this kind of work was done through the irrigation lab. For example, the researchers have identified surface water suitability studies in Ghana with a potential of 211,000 hectares, with profits ranging for farmers to around 285 million USD per year. So if you think about solar, say in the same country as Ghana, surface and groundwater up to 25 meters depth, the figure for sustainable potential is about 2.3 million hectares in Ghana. Second question I would pose is, how do we involve women, youth, and marginalized populations so that they can benefit from climate-friendly irrigation practices? The majority of agricultural machines like irrigation are designed with the assumption that men will be the end users. So even when women access these machines, they sometimes find the machines cumbersome or unusable. On top of that, the power, such as control of finance to buy the equipment, rests with men, family heads, or elders. So what can researchers do, like EME and IFPRI? For example, the irrigation lab worked with private sector companies on approach to reach more women and resource-poor farmers, particularly refining credit scoring and assessment tools and market segmentation to be more gender responsive. The third question I would pose is, are the farming and market systems right for irrigation investment uptake? With that, if you look at the farming systems, we need to think about integrating the irrigation with, is a seed quality right? Is there good access to fertilizer? Are good integrated pest management there? Are there significant extension service resources to support farmers for climate adaptation, such as on solar irrigation? On market systems, collaborating and encouraging irrigation practices in areas where there is no access for farmers to sell their produce will likely lead to net losses. Should we locate irrigation in areas close to urban areas where there are markets, or if the farm areas are far away, can we improve climate-friendly transportation systems in collaboration with the Ministry of Transportation colleagues? For example, the irrigation lab has had great success in scaling irrigated fora in Bahar Dar in Ethiopia, as there was a demand for feed due to the expansion of dairy farming in the peri-urban and urban areas. Collaboration with market actors, especially the private sector, is critical in addressing climate adaptation challenges, sustainability, as well as profits for all stakeholders. For example, the Cereal Systems Initiative for South Asia, which works in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, provides irrigation as well as other services through local service providers that provide service such as tilling and harvesting at the same time. The fourth question I would pose is, how do we strengthen policy systems, institutional mechanisms, and capacity building to address climate variability and shocks? On policy systems, is there a political will and support from policy decision makers to create or direct institutions to support small-scale irrigation practices? For example, is there research evidence that by reducing import tax of solar irrigation equipment, there will be sustainable income growth for poor farmers? Fifth, and my last question is, do we have the resilience to sustainably adapt to climate shocks and stresses? For example, IFPRI's research has shown that farmers who irrigate are more resilient to drought. I visited Ethiopia one time during a drought season where a farmer told me that if he did not have irrigation pump and associated resources, his dependence on food aid would have been very high. But still, even irrigated households can face problems when facing drought. Do farmers have insurance, or can they afford insurance if there are, for example, not enough water to irrigate and they don't have enough funds to pay the loans they took for the equipment and for associated costs such as on seed? Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to continuing to listen and learn from you all.
Thank you, Binyob. So I like the way that you have basically in your 5 questions tracked all the way from do we need solar, and does all the way to the conditions under which solar can thrive, to whether solar is indeed leading to resilience, and what happens in that future warmer world. Does it still remain effective? Thanks a lot for that really comprehensive answer. With that, I would like to move to Mr. Arif Gohar and ask you the same question. What do we need to do differently? And if you can speak in the context of Pakistan, where we know that there isn't the kind of subsidies that others. So the Pakistan model of solar has been a bit different. It has been mostly farmers who can afford it have been paying it from their own pockets without the subsidy model. So can you walk us a bit through what's happening in Pakistan?
Do you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Aditi ji, and the organizers for inviting me and share my thoughts regarding the context of Pakistan. In Pakistan, as you are all aware, is the 5th largest population. To meet the food requirements is a huge challenge for us. Certainly, there are limits to expansion of the land. Since last couple of years, our area is stagnant at 22 million hectares. Though we are among number 10 countries in many of the produces, but still the country is a food insecure country. we face almost 18% chronic food insecurity in the country. Solar potential is huge in the country. Almost more than 3,000 hours a year are available in Pakistan. Solar, can provide a triple win to our nation. Firstly, we have 1.5 million tube wells right now, which are owned mostly by the rich people, rich farmer over there. But small farmers are still without having access to these tube wells. So the conversion of it to, the huge fuel prices are putting a pressure on the country. So the first thing for the government is to convert these 1.5 million, out of which 1.1 are diesel and 0.4 are electric based. Conversion to solar is a very promising thing for the government. And in order to have access of the solars to the smallholder farmers, we have a scheme in which 50% of the cost is being borne by the government and remaining 50% by the small farmers. So this is a scheme. But in order to avoid over exploitation, government has made it compulsory. Whosoever enjoys this support from the government, he has to develop a sprinkler-based irrigation system on the field. So this solar intervention is mainly meant for high-value crops, as you mentioned about the orchards and like these things. So the government is trying really hard and developing a package based on the water availability, water quality, agriculture, zoning, how these can be made available to the common farmer and smallholder farmer. One recent intervention which the government of Pakistan has done is the portable solar facility. It is mounted on the tractor and it can be given to the smallholders and farmers. So in order to, the basic purpose is to absorb or to cope with the climate change shocks. For example, this year's heat waves, many of the farmers, smallholder farmers, were unable to have the groundwater facility. So that's why our wheat yields reduced to the tune of 10%. The same happened the last year where our maize and rice yields were affected. So government is trying hard to capacitate the farming communities to how they can use this facility and can use the solar panels for the groundwater extraction so that the climate shocks can be minimized, the resilience should be there in the system. And last but not the least, these also provide, as I already mentioned, a huge government exchequer that is used on the diesel and petrol things. It will be saved. And a third one, and the initial estimates say that around 1.9 million ton CO2 equivalent emissions will be saved. So this is the thing that we are facing.
So I have a follow-up question. So you're already subsidizing and buying these, fossil fuel for outside, but on the other hand, you don't really have a subsidy scheme for SIPs. Why don't you repurpose the fossil fuel subsidy and start subsidizing solar irrigation pumps in? Or are there plans on the way for something like that?
Yeah, very good question. The same is being realized in the country these days, and the government is keenly focusing to I can say, adjust the plans in this context. Yeah.
Good to know. So I'm also a bit conscious of time, so I'll hand it. Are we doing okay? So can we hand over to you, or should? Yeah. Okay. No, I just would. In that case, I'll ask our panelists to give us a quick 1 minute. 1 minute takeaway or thought on what is that one critical barrier you think you need to overcome to mainstream solar. And not so much in terms of technology, as we know that technology is always mature, but I was coming more from a policy governance angle. What is that one barrier that needs to go?
Is that for me first?
Yes, you first. Yes.
Thanks. Okay, no worries. I think for me, if I were to state one thing, is the looking at it as a system, as an integrated system, the whole policy, market, and farming systems, agronomic systems. If we look at it as an integrated system, rather than as its separate ones, addressing either one technology here or focusing on one or there, we might end up in failure. So looking at it from a system perspective is my key message here. Thank you.
Okay. No, that's a very good message. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you, Aditi. The first intervention government should take into account is the allocations of cropping zones in that, because you know in Pakistan most of the water intensive crops are sown. So giving access to the farming community to the solar, which is almost minimal cost, so there is chances of over exploitation. So government should have a coherent policy on that field. And the second thing is the capacity building of the farming community to have the optimum use of water for these things. So these are the two interventions the government should take.
Right. Thank you so much to our panelists. I'll hand it back to Santosh ji. Would the panelists still be on stage or? Okay.
Thank you, Aditi. We are coming to the end of the session. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Nisrim Laham for closing remarks. Dr. Laham is an agri-food systems transformation expert at the Arab Organizations for Agriculture Development. Before joining this organization, she was a regional project manager and senior researcher at IMI. And at a former stage, she was also with regional advisor for GIZ. Okay, over to you, Dr. Laham.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank IFPRI for inviting me to take part in this very interesting session. I'll try to make it short and hopefully sweet. This next session introduced new findings on solar irrigation uptake and challenges in Africa and South Asia, and the potential of this technology in a climate crisis. The experts and panelists discussed trade-offs across greenhouse gas mitigation, food and nutrition security, and water depletion. The main outcomes of this session are: solar irrigation and solar systems in general can reduce greenhouse gas emissions while supporting food security and nutrition through irrigation, but also through filling other food system gaps like solar cold storage. Expansion of solar solutions in agriculture are hampered by poor supply chains and lack of appropriate business and finance models. Solar irrigation solutions need to be joined with improved institutional landscape and governance system of groundwater from a nexus and systematic approach. More analyses are needed to ensure that women equally benefit from solar solutions. This session links to CGIAR initiative Nexus Gains, realizing multiple benefits across water, energy, food, and ecosystems. This initiative provides south-to-south learning on scaling solar irrigation systems between South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. We in the MENA region and through the League of Arab States, namely the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development, look forward to learning from the experience of South Asia and Africa and getting involved in the Nexus Gains initiative. We have here also the head of the Middle Region Office, Dr. Kamel Amir, with me, and I'm sure that he also agrees with me on the need to have this South-South collaboration and to learn from this initiative and get involved in. We share the same challenges we heard: the initial cost, the gender involvement, the maintenance issue. The need to have this holistic approach, how we can have these business models. All these challenges are the same, and hopefully we can learn from the way forward and the initiatives that you are doing in Ethiopia, in Africa in general, and in Asia, because there's an opportunity to exchange these cases, success stories, and cases. Finally, I wish you all a safe trip to your home back, and see you in COP20 for me, hopefully in Dubai. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laham. And with this, we'd like to conclude these sessions. Thank you very much, those who are present here and those who have joined us from online. And also like to thank David and Biniam. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.